If you want to attract frogs to your garden, developing a frog pond is a great way to do that. One thing a lot of people don't realise is that frogs actually spend most of the time out of the water. So you need to provide a well-vegetated area to provide shelter for the frogs and also to attract insects and other invertebrates that they will use as a source of food. You need to include physical elements such as logs and rocks, mulch and bark, as well as those flowering plants and ground covers to bring in the invertebrates and to provide plenty of food and refuge spots for those frogs. And physical elements like rocks and logs can be used to create platforms to allow the frogs to move in and out of the water quite easily. Especially young frogs have a lot of difficulty getting out of the water if you've got very steep sides. So developing these ramps and platforms is really important to enable access for those frogs into and out of the water. If you only have plants in and really next to the pond, you're not going to get the frogs hanging around very long, if they come at all. You need to have that well-vegetated garden to provide the buffet for the frogs and to make it an oasis, not a desert. If you don't have this vegetation and you've got just a barren area, the frogs are not going to come, or they're not going to be happy if they are here. It's also important to remember that the pond needs to be shaded, about 2/3 shaded all of the time. It doesn't have to be the same 2/3 shaded. You can have the sun moving over and different parts of the pond being shaded, but if you are in full sun, you are going to get problems with algae and other plant growth. And you also want to make sure it's not completely shaded, because if it is shaded, the water will be very cold, and that causes problems for the developing tadpoles. If the water is really, really cold, those tadpoles are going to develop very, very slowly, and that will also expose them to dangers from predators. So you've got to get that balance between not too hot and sunny and not too cold and shaded. So about 2/3 shaded at all times is the rule of thumb. You also want to be careful about where you position the pond. Don't put it right next to a bedroom window, even your neighbour's bedroom window, because some of these frogs, once they start calling, can be very, very noisy and may keep people awake at night. So position it carefully within your garden. It's also important to make sure you don't position it downhill of a compost heap or other source of nutrients, because that will lead to problems with algae in the water. It's also a really good idea to make sure you've got different depths of water within the pond. So have a shallow area as well as a deep area. And as I mentioned, having ramps or platforms so that the little frogs can get in and out of the water. These different water depths will also help you to have different sorts of plants, so you're not going to get stuck with just one sort of plant, and having the diversity of plants will enable a diversity of insects and other invertebrates. Some people really like to have fountains or cascades in their pond. You can have those without discouraging the frogs too much, as long as the water is not flowing too quickly. If you've got a big raging fountain, that will discourage mosquitoes, but it's also going to discourage the tadpoles as well. So a little trickle of water is good, creates a nice little feature for you, and also helps aerate the water, keep the water nice and fresh. If the water's too fast, you're going to get rid of the frogs and the tadpoles. So you've got to get that balance right. Having a cascade with a shallow pond feeding into a larger pond, as well as looking and sounding great, also provides a nice water source for birds. So they will come and drink and use it as a bird bath. So this pond is not just for frogs, it's for the other wildlife in the garden as well. Having little nooks and crannies in and around the pond provides nice little areas for the frogs to move in and to call from. So some of these little cavities, you will find the small frogs move in and call from there, and the cavities act as an echo chamber, boosting their call. So you may find that some of these frogs sound really loud when they're hiding in these little spots. So these provide great little sheltering places where the frogs can call, but also be safe from predators. In terms of pond plants, you want to provide a range of different habitat layers. So you're going to want to have some of the free-floating plants like duckweed, as well as some of the emergent plants. So these are plants like reeds and sedges, which have their roots down at the bottom of the pond. They grow through the pond and then stick up. So these will provide places where the frogs can hide, but also spots where they can attach their eggs. As well as those plants, you want to have some of the submerged ones. They will provide places where the frogs or the tadpoles can hide. and also they'll help aerate the water and act as a source of food. And of course you want to have lots of different plants around the pond to bring in those insects and give the frogs places to hide. So the most important message I'm trying to get across to you is that the pond is not the most important part of the habitat for the frogs. They will use it, but they will spend most of their time out in the garden. So make sure you've got those physical structures for the frogs. Put in a bog garden, have lots of different plants. The frogs will be really happy. They'll move in and provide a great joy for you into the future.